Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. We're here with a Mailbag edition the week before the season begins, and we get back to our regular Wednesday, Friday podcast schedule. We're going to get right into it because we have a lot of questions. Now, I am recording this after the 2-game suspension for Danny Davis was announced. A lot of my earlier questions when I asked for them were about what might happen to Davis and things like that, so I'll sort of just talk about that in an overarching sense. Davis was suspended 2 games on Wednesday for his involvement in an alleged sexual assault against Quintez Cephus. Now, Cephus is, as you guys probably know, is facing criminal charges and is going to be in court on Thursday and has been suspended indefinitely from the team. I don't think you're going to be seeing, Cephus anytime this season, if ever, depending on how that situation shakes out for him. In Davis's case, he has not been charged criminally with anything. At least as of right now, he's in the clear in that regard. And Paul Chris suspended him for 2 games. According to a criminal complaint, Davis was present at the time of the alleged sexual assault and was laughing and taking pictures of the women. And for that is the reason why he's being suspended 2 games by Chris. Now, some people are going to say, that, there aren't any criminal charges, so he shouldn't be suspended at all. And other people will say, look at what he did in the criminal complaint and say he should be suspended for much longer. I'm not going to really get into that too much about what I think about, how long he should be suspended and whatnot. That's definitely, there's different opinions flying out there around that. But from a football sense moving forward, this really doesn't have a big effect on Wisconsin's season at all. I mean, I guess for those who think the suspension should have been longer, you could definitely argue this really isn't much punishment when you think about the fact that Davis is going to miss games against Western Kentucky and New Mexico, games that Wisconsin should easily win with or without Davis. So I mean, if this stands and he's only suspended 2 games and he's not charged criminally, I think that him returning against BYU and being there for Big Ten play really shouldn't affect Wisconsin's season all that much. And, for those 2 games to have, Kendrick Pryor and A.J. Taylor and then, get our first look at Aaron Cruikshank and everything, everything he can do after the big offseason he had, I think they're definitely going to have, plenty at the wide receiver position to be able to get past Western Kentucky and New Mexico. So, that's the biggest news of the week. Danny Davis suspended 2 games, and I guess I haven't really touched on the podcast about Cephus's absence either. I mean, obviously I think he was their best receiver, and obviously it's going to be difficult to replace his production. But again, they have this is if you picked one position group where you were going to lose your top guy, I think wide receiver would have been it. You still have Davis there when he returns from his suspension, and Pryor and Taylor and Cruikshank, and you have a couple other younger guys you feel really good about. So I think that some fans are a little worried that this could be a huge distraction, and with Cephus gone for the foreseeable future, that this could really kind of derail a season where Wisconsin comes in ranked number 4 in the country, according to the AP poll. But I don't think it will. I think it's something they can overcome on the football field. We'll have to wait and see how Cephus' situation plays out and if anything more happens with Davis. But as of right now, I think that on the field, Wisconsin's going to be able to, play a couple teams at the beginning of the season that they should be able to handle pretty easily, and by that point maybe they can kind of get on a roll. Okay, let's move on from that to a much more lighthearted question from Jake Kokorowski at JakeCocoB5Q. He asked, how excited are you for Pepsi being in the press box, and is it 1/10 of the excitement that is running through my bones currently? Jake, I'm not even excited at all, honestly. I mean, I don't really understand your obsession with Pepsi. I just don't get it. If you want to say Pepsi is, better than RC Cola, that's fine. But we had Dr. Pepper in the press box last year, and that's a big disappointment going from Dr. Pepper to Pepsi. So I can't say, not only am I not even 1/10 excited as you, I'm not excited at all. So you go ahead and enjoy your Diet Pepsi, and I will be drinking water. Next one's from Kyle Gasser at Gasman3268. He asks, if Davis takes a leave of absence or is suspended, which, actually, as we mentioned already, has happened, what does the top 4 look like at wide receiver? 1 Taylor, 2 Pryor, 3 and 4 are question marks. Thanks. Thanks for that question, Kyle. We touched on this a little bit earlier. I think Taylor and Pryor, obviously, while Davis is out, are definitely the top 2 guys. I think Aaron Cruikshank would be the one guy you look at as it seems like he would be the definite number 3. A true freshman that, like we've talked about all offseason, has had really time and time again has been impressive throughout spring practice. He was kind of the story of the spring, and then in fall, even though he's been the number 5 guy behind those other more experienced players, he's been a guy that's made a lot of plays and has been pretty consistent out there. Now, he's a really small guy, but he's kind of shown throughout the offseason too that he can take a little bit of contact here and there and stand up to it well. Now, the one thing about Cruikshank is that he's still kind of learning the playbook. He is a guy that enrolled early and has had the entire offseason here, but he's another guy that Ted Gilmore has said in the past to some media members that he's not really taking the mental reps that maybe he needs to be. When he's not in the game, he needs to be paying a little bit more attention to what's going on, and he needs to make sure that he he's learning the entire playbook and really got the mental side of the game down. So you have to wonder if maybe they'd feel a little bit more comfortable early in the season here putting Adam Krumholtz or Jack Dunn, sophomores that have been here a little bit longer and played a little bit at the end of last season. You have to wonder if maybe they'll feel a little bit more comfortable putting those guys out there for extended reps. Now, I think Cruikshank will be the number 3 guy, but I also think that it wouldn't be shocking if Krumholtz or Dunn got a look in there as well. I think that after Cruikshank, those 2 guys are the next in line, probably that would get an opportunity, although another true freshman, Taj Mustafa, is someone who's been really impressive as well throughout. He's another early enrollee who looked good in the spring and continued that into the fall. So I think that he could get an opportunity, although with Davis potentially coming back after only 2 games, I think that they're going to still want to redshirt Mustafa. Now, that still means he could play in 4 games. With the new redshirt rules this year, he could play in 4 games and still redshirt. So I think you may see him at some point. Whether he'll get time in these first couple games, I'm not really sure. But I think you'll see Cruikshank a lot more against Western Kentucky and New Mexico. And then Jack Dunn and Adam Krumholtz might get their crack at the lineup too before Mustafa does. Let's see, Big Cat 5969 at Tyler Barissa. He asks, is Xander Neville full go for the start of the season? How much of an impact does he provide for the run game? With all the recent wide receiver legal issues, I feel he is a big asset for the Badgers to just pound the rock. Yeah, Neville's been hurt pretty much this entire offseason. He's been coming back from the ACL tear from the time that happened against Minnesota in November until fall camp began pretty much, or at least during summer conditioning was the first time he was really kind of getting back into it. And then he suffered another little injury early on in fall camp. So, our open practices are now finished. Our last open practice that we saw was this past Saturday night, and Neville was still out, but it seems like he's doing more and more work. He's doing a little bit of positional work. He's running on the sideline, so it looks like he's close to coming back. We'll see if he's on the injury report at the beginning of next week when that comes out for the first game. But I do expect Neville to be playing against Western Kentucky, and I think, I think he's going to be healthy. So I think it's a matter of him staying healthy and making sure nothing else is bothering him, because I do think he is a really big part of this offense. He's one of those guys that maybe the casual fan doesn't really look at and see as a really huge piece, but he is, by far, I would think by far their best blocking tight end. And this offense, when you have a bunch of 2 and 3 tight end sets, you need at least one of those guys to be a real solid run blocker, and he's a guy that they're going to rely on a lot. You kind of saw that last year when when he went out, it was actually a really big deal, and that was even when they back when they had Troy Fumagalli still. But with just Fumagalli in there, and maybe where Peniston and Jake Ferguson and guys like that weren't quite maybe where you'd want them to be from a run blocking standpoint. I think Neville going out at the end of last year was a really big deal, and although I think Peniston has made some strides this offseason to become a better blocker, I still think you really want Neville in there to be able to kind of anchor that, sort of become an extension of that offensive line and really be able to give you a lot in the run game. So yeah, I think you're right, Tyler. I think that's a really big thing to keep an eye on. I think he is going to be healthy for week 1, but if he can't stay on the field, that could be a really big loss for Wisconsin this year. Next one's from Brandon Fanning, at Brandon Fanning. He asks, where do you rank Scott Nelson's fall camp among the last 3 free safeties, Jamerson, Musso, and McAvoy? That's a good question, Brandon. I think that I think Nelson has the potential to be better than all 3 of those guys. Now, maybe not necessarily this season. He is still a redshirt freshman. I think when you look at those last couple guys, Jamerson and Musso, I mean, those guys were players that really had breakout senior seasons. They really didn't get their opportunity until they were in their final year, and it was sort of a make or break time for them. And Jamerson, kind of translated that into an NFL draft pick. So I don't think Scott Nelson's at a point now where he's going to jump in there and do exactly what Jamerson did for them. I think Nelson does have some speed on him, and he can cover a lot of ground. I don't think he's quite as fast as someone like Nichol Jamerson right now. But from what I've seen in camp, Scott Nelson is a real ball hawking safety. He can read plays really well. He can cover a lot of ground, and he's got good hands. I think he's a guy that if I had to bet on somebody right now leading the team in interceptions, I would pick Scott Nelson this season. I think he's had a few pretty impressive ones during camp, and I think he's a guy that could sit back there in the middle of the defense and really pick off some passes. So he still hasn't played in a real game yet. We haven't seen a whole lot from him in that regard, but I think that he could turn into better than any of those 3 guys. I think by the time he's a junior or senior, he will be. There could be some freshman mistakes out there at the start. I think it's probably a good thing for him and some of the young cornerbacks that they do get to play a couple, really easy opponents in Western Kentucky and New Mexico to start the season, so they can kind of work themselves into some game time rather than playing a big-time opponent from the start. But I really like what I've seen from Nelson, and it looks like he's really been the number 1 guy at free safety from really the entire offseason. From the start of spring, it seemed like he was really the guy. So I think that's a really good – I think he's a guy that you might have actually seen last year. If he didn't get injured during fall camp and didn't get behind in that regard, I think when Dixon was dealing with a lot of his injury issues, you might have – you maybe would have seen maybe Nelson worked in there at some point, even though he's more of the free safety that Jamerson was. I think that he probably would have been worked in some last year if he didn't kind of suffer that injury and get behind a little bit. So he's a guy that they've liked since he got here, and I think he's going to have a really good season. Someone asked about my favorite afternoon snack. I'd probably go with an apple and some nuts. I think that's probably my go-to there. Let's see. Where will Ohio State build the statue of Urban Meyer? I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. It's going to be interesting to see what happens if Urban Meyer is going to be there and with Ohio State. I mean, we've talked about Wisconsin's distractions this week and getting through this incident with Cephus and Davis, but Ohio State's probably in a more fragile situation from a football standpoint with Urban Meyer, their head coach possibly not being there this season. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, how long he's gone, and if Ohio State starts to kind of take a dip, it's going to be interesting to see if Wisconsin and the other East teams on the other side of the division can take advantage. So if Wisconsin's facing a different team other than Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, maybe that gives them a little bit better chance to get through, push through finally, and win the Big Ten and make the playoffs. Next one's from Ty at TJ Hoft 14. He asks, assuming Dante Carey-Williams earns back a starting spot, who would you expect to win the other corner spot, Caesar Williams or Faion Hicks? I don't think we should necessarily assume Kerry Williams is going to earn that starting spot back. I think at some point he will. I think he's got the talent to, and I think he's the most experienced guy clearly at that position, and I think he is the most talented as well. But I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out. I think he's going to eventually earn that starting spot back, whether it's for week 1 or not. I'm not really sure. I think that Caesar Williams is probably the guy that pairs with him if Kerry Williams is on the first team. Now, I know you mentioned Caesar Williams and Faion Hicks because those are the two guys that recently have been taking all the first team reps. And I think Williams, I was a big Faion Hicks guy entering this offseason and throughout spring, and I was kind of favoring him to be that other starting corner. But I think when it's all said and done here and we get to the end of fall camp where we are now, I think Caesar Williams would be the guy. I think they really like his height and his length, and I think he's been really impressive throughout this offseason. And he's a guy that is a redshirt sophomore now, and that they've really liked him since he came on campus, and he hasn't quite gotten his opportunity yet, but I think he's taken advantage of this offseason and really kind of gone up a level, and I think that he's performed really well, and I think he's been a little bit more impressive than Hicks this fall. So I think if I had to take a guess right now, Caesar Williams is the guy I would pair with Kerry Williams. Now, again, this cornerback situation is the hardest one to predict. Not only Kerry Williams and that situation, but I think it's really hard to decipher which guys they like the most of these other players, these guys that haven't really played much. But like I said, I think I'd probably go with Caesar Williams at this point. Ty has a second question. Is Jake Ferguson pushing for any first team reps at tight end? I think he's definitely the number 3 guy right now, but in Wisconsin's offense, that number 3 guy plays a lot. That number 3 guy last year was Peniston, and he was out there quite a bit. They play 3 tight end sets a decent amount, and even 2 tight end sets they might want to give, Peniston a break at some point. Or we talked about Neville and the injury issues he's had recently as well. So I think Ferguson is going to get his opportunity. I think he still needs to get better as a blocker. That's probably the one thing that's going to keep him from getting a ton of reps out there, but I think they're going to need him this season, and he's going to have an opportunity to show what he can do in the passing game. I think a lot of those 3 tight end sets where they'll put him out there with Peniston and Neville, and he'll be able to maybe they won't need to rely on him as much in certain packages. They won't need to rely on his blocking ability, I should say, as much in certain packages, and he can go out there and run some routes, and they can get him involved, because I think he is going to be a real threat in the passing game. As a redshirt freshman, we'll see exactly how big of an impact he has. I don't think he's going to go out there and lead the team and catches and yards or anything like that as a redshirt freshman, but I think he's going to be able to get his feet wet this season, kind of show what he can do in the passing game, and then when Neville's gone next year, maybe with another offseason where he can be able to put a little bit more weight on and become a little bit better blocker, he definitely has the potential to become a great tight end here. Next question from Big Boss Man at PMCY asks, looking at Cephus news from a football-only point of view, if he misses the year and is found not guilty / innocent, could a red shirt be given to the lost year? Yes, he could. Cephus played as a true freshman and has not redshirted, so regardless of the reason why he's missing the season, he can still take a redshirt year. So yeah, if he misses his entire season and then is found innocent and returns to the team, then I would think next season he would be a redshirt sophomore rather than a junior. And that's not something UW would even need to apply for. It's not a medical thing. It's just a matter of he has not taken his redshirt year yet, so he can just not play and get his year back. Let's see. Brian Vandenzen at B Vandenzen. He asked, when will we know whether Iowa will be a night game? Same for Michigan and Penn State. Night games at Iowa and or Penn State could make an already difficult road schedule daunting. That's a good question, Brian. Usually these game times are determined, about 12 days in advance. Sometimes they take the option to go 6 games in advance, but I think for night games are a little tricky. They used to not. I think for the Penn State game, I don't really expect that one to be a night game. So the new rules for night games in November in the Big Ten, they used to not have them at all. But now I think both teams have to agree to have a night game, or at least Wisconsin has the right to veto that night game as long as it's 12 days in advance, I think is what the rule is. And So I think when you look at that from Wisconsin's perspective, they're not going to want to go to Penn State and play that game at night and have to endure that atmosphere. So I think that I would assume that they're going to veto that potential for a night game against Penn State, and that game will not be will either be 11 o'clock or 2:30. Now, if since that's one of the last 3 weeks of the season, I believe Wisconsin has the right to do that as long as they do it 12 days in advance. So I don't expect that game to be at night. Now, Iowa, I'm pretty sure Iowa's going to try to get that their Wisconsin game at night. It's the Big Ten opener, and I think Iowa really wants that atmosphere in a big game like that. And if you look at from Iowa's perspective, if they win that game, they're really on the front foot to try to go win the West and with a tiebreaker over Wisconsin. And I think they only have one difficult crossover game with the East this year. So that's a huge game for both Iowa and Wisconsin. And I'm kind of thinking that game is going to be at night. I've heard that Iowa is trying to make it at night. Now, we probably won't know until 12 days before, so we'll have to wait a couple more weeks on that. But I would not be surprised at all if that's a night game. Let's see. Akshaf, at Akshaf. I never know how to say your Twitter handle. Not sure what it means. But he asks, how do you think the cornerbacks play out? Pick top 2 or 3 and stick with them, or rotate when a guy messes up, or a planned rotation, etc.? I think they're probably going to have their top few guys that they stick with, and then sort of have that competition ongoing in practice. I don't necessarily think I don't think they're going to rotate when a guy messes up. That's one thing I don't think they're going to do. I don't think they want to. Jim Leonard doesn't seem like a guy that's going to just punish a guy for making a mistake by just taking him out of the game completely. I think he wants these guys to be able to learn from their mistakes and go in there and have an opportunity to make up for it the next time out. Now that's if somebody is not performing and messes up a few times, then I think you could definitely see a change, because they do have 5 guys there that I think they feel pretty good about. I think they're going to kind of go into that first game with sort of a set, maybe 3 guys that they have I think through the first few weeks of the season, though, they're going to have that competition continue on from fall camp. And, the first game you might see a certain 3 guys, play in the first game. And then maybe by Big Ten play, one of those spots kind of shifts around. Now, as of right now, I kind of think that Faion Hicks and Madison Cohn are the 2 guys they feel really good about in the slot. So when they go into a nickel package, I think those 2 guys are really competing for those spots. Right now, Caesar Williams, Faion Hicks are the 2 guys, like I mentioned earlier, that are taking the first team reps. But you have to imagine Dante Carey-Williams at least gets in that rotation and becomes a guy that eventually either takes his starting spot back or is playing a lot. So I think in the end of the day, Dante Carey-Williams, Caesar Williams, and Faion Hicks might be their top 3 guys, with Hicks playing in the slot when all 3 of them are on the field. And Madison Cohn, I think, could continue to push Hicks for his spot as that slot cornerback. And Deron Harrell, he's been a sort of revelation this fall, a guy that switched from wide receiver to cornerback in the spring and really just didn't look ready yet in the spring and didn't really get a whole lot of reps, and came out here and has been taking some first-team reps this fall and rotating with those guys. And I think he's going to be given the chance to continue to compete. But I think in the end, I don't know if he may end up being the odd man out, a guy that's not quite, doesn't quite have the college experience at cornerback as these other guys do. Now, none of them really have game experience except for Carey-Williams, but I think Harrell, I think you could give him a little bit more time. He could kind of be a guy that's sort of on the fringes this season. You could get him playing time here and there, but I don't know if he's going to emerge as a guy that, I think it would still surprise me if he emerges as a guy that ends up starting for this team. So that's going to be, it's definitely something to watch. I mean, you can probably tell by the way I'm answering this that I really don't have much of a clue exactly what's going to happen with this position. It's really difficult to project right now. I do think Carey-Williams will eventually earn a starting spot, and then it'll be him and Caesar Williams as the 2 guys. If I had to predict right now, I think Hicks is probably that 3rd slot guy, with Harrell and Cohn trying to to fight for any time they can get. So I guess the good thing is with Harrell kind of emerging this offseason is that you have a little more depth there, where if one or two of these guys gets hurt, there's probably not much of a drop off. So I think there's going to be some mistakes from these guys throughout the season, at least early in the season, as they kind of get used to actually playing in real games. But I think there's a lot of talent there, and that they do have depth. They have 5 guys they feel pretty good about. So I think they're going to eventually stick on, a few guys that they like. But I think that competition could carry in through the first few weeks, and I think that it could kind of rotate a little bit. All right, last one here. Nathan Lewandowski at Louis_15. He asked, do you think Hornibrook holds to his Orange Bowl performance, or was it a spark in the pan? Nathan, I think that it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? I mean, Hornibrook's not going to go out there and throw 4 touchdowns a game and play as well as he did against Miami week in and week out. I think it's not really realistic to expect that. But I think you can look at that game, and I think he takes a lot of positives away from it, and I think it's a good sign that you could at least see him go up against a really good defense that was a defense that really turned the other team over more than just about anybody in the country. I mean, they forced that was kind of what they were known for last year, was the turnover chain and forcing as many turnovers as they did. And Hornibrook went out there really in a road game against a good team and a good defense on a big stage and played a clean game and didn't throw any interceptions and really kind of at times tore their secondary apart a little bit. So I think there's a lot of good to take from that game. And I think it's really just about him playing more consistently, playing on that level a little bit more consistently this year. I think there were a lot of times last year before the Miami game that Hornibrook played really well. And I think there are other times where he had throws that he would really like back. So I think just finding a little bit more consistency where maybe he's not throwing 4 touchdowns every game, and maybe he doesn't, go a whole season without throwing a pick. But I think if he can cut his interception total down and play more consistently game to game, and not have those, just kind of take away that 1 or 2 throws a game where he is, where he throws the ball where he shouldn't or makes a bad decision. I think that he is going to take a step up this year. He's got the weapons around him to have a great season. And I just think that if he can eliminate some of his mistakes and play a little bit more consistently, then he could have a really big year. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for all your questions. We are going to go back to our regular game schedule next week, or in-season schedule, I should say, where we have our regular episode on Wednesday, where we have another beat writer or somebody else a guest on to talk about the Badgers, and then on Friday we will do our weekly mailbag like we're doing today. So make sure you subscribe to the Red Zone on iTunes or Google Play, and visit madison.com for all your Badgers football news. Thanks for listening.